This week on Thinking Biblically, we welcome back a good friend of mine who is living in Israel, and we're going to learn about a special festival that's happening today that a lot of people, even a lot of Jewish people, aren't very aware of, and why we might refer to it as the Feast of Fruits and Nuts. Welcome back to Thinking Biblically. My name is Alan Gilman. Thinking Biblically is a podcast that is dedicated to exploring how all Scripture speaks to all of life. Before I introduce this week's guest, I do want to remind everyone to please subscribe, review, share, and that really helps. So I'm very happy to reintroduce to you my friend Michael Gertsman. Michael Gertsman has been involved as a teacher and spiritual leader in various capacities in Canada and Israel since 1982. He's been instrumental in starting 4 Messianic congregations. In 1998, he founded Lion of Judah Ministries Canada. Michael and his wife of 52 years, Florin, spend half the year each in Canada and Israel, where, among other things, he's been involved in administering and funding humanitarian aid and community development projects in immigrant communities. And that's something we plan to talk about today. Michael and Florin have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be with you again, to see you, my friend.
Now, the last time we talked, you were a little closer to where I am. I'm in Ottawa, Canada's capital, and you were also in Canada at the time, but you're not in Canada now.
No, I'm not in Canada now. We returned to Israel at the end of the first week of December. Currently, I'm in our home in Nahariya, which is the northernmost city in Israel, about 10 kilometers south of the Lebanese border. Today, it's on the cool side, nothing like you're experiencing in Canada, mercifully. But it's a lovely sunny day.
What do you call cool? What do you call cool? A cool day, January.
Well, I think the high was 13 today, so that's cool here.
Yeah. So for your American folks, that's about 51, 52 Fahrenheit.
Something like that.
Yeah. We would. Yeah. So I did want to show you what you're missing. So. First of all, we're recording this. It's almost 10:15 Monday morning, January the 17th. I used to post these every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Now I'm trying to post them as soon as they're ready. So hopefully in a few hours this will be up for people to see. So it's going to be timely. That's the word I was looking for. So let me see if I could bring this up here. Okay, let me show you. This is just from, this is about an hour ago.
Oh, God.
Yeah, see the light is on. That's an automatic light that comes on at night. Usually, if it was sunny, it would be a brilliant sunny day. And you can't really feel what it was like. Walking home after with the wind in my face was really something. So let me come back here. There we go. Yeah, it's been a while. So we're both from this part of Canada, Ottawa, Montreal, have very similar kind of weather. We've been in the Ottawa area back from the West Coast, which is not like this. We've been here almost 20 years, and we've had some snow dumps. But I think this is the first time on my weather app it came up from Environment Canada saying that there was a blizzard warning in effect and blizzard conditions. And we grew up, when we were kids, we had blizzards. But we haven't seen a real blizzard in a while. So that's what's going on right now as we speak. And it's just the beginning. It's supposed to last all day. All sorts of things are closed and so on. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a taste. I don't really feel that bad that you're there. Well, a little bit. I am looking forward to getting back to Israel someday soon. And it's not just about the weather.
You live in the true north, cold and free.
Well, how free it is these days is
I
another
don't know how
story.
free it is in the true north cold, for sure.
Absolutely. But spring is coming. Spring is coming.
Yes, spring
And,
is coming.
and speaking of spring, it's actually a special day on the Jewish calendar.
Yeah.
And it turned out we were going to be talking today. We're going to be talking about other things, but beforehand, I asked you if you'd like to share a little bit about this special day. Why don't you explain it to folks?
Okay, well, actually, it is springtime here, but not springtime that you're accustomed to. It's Tu BiShvat, which is actually Tu BiShvat means the 15th of Shvat, which is the Jewish month we're in. And it's called the New Year of the Trees, the New Year of the Trees. And it began last night at sundown, and it's going to end tonight. Now, it's not a biblical celebration, but it appears in later Jewish writings as one of 4 New Years in the Jewish calendar. Yes, sir, folks, we have 4 New Years. I'm not going to talk about the other 3 right now, but I'm going to just briefly explain how this celebration got started. You see, in Bible times, when people planted trees, it tells us in the Torah that they were forbidden to eat the fruit of those trees for the first 3 years after the trees were planted. And then in the 4th year, they were required to bring the crops of those fruit trees to the temple in Jerusalem as a tithe to the Lord. So the 15th of Shvat, which ends up usually around February in the Julian calendar, was the date that was used in later years to calculate the age of the fruit trees, okay, from year to year. You see, usually trees start to form their rings annually in the springtime. And as I said, springtime in Israel, climate-wise, begins around the latter half of January every year. And it's the time when the almond trees start to bud, and all the almond trees put on the most beautiful buds and blossoms. They're really a sight to see. And so that's why it's a new year. The rings start to form for the next year. It starts in the springtime. We've appointed the 15th of Shvat, which is sometime in the latter part of January, moves back and forth. Now, one way it's celebrated by more observant Jews is with a special Seder. A Seder is a special meal. The word Seder means order. And it's a feast. It's a feast. It's a feast of nuts. It's a feast of fruits, accompanied by 4 cups of wine, and special prayers are recited as well. And so,
you're not wait a fruits and you say a feast of fruits and nuts. Is that, you're talking about literal fruits and nuts, not the people who attend them.
Let's just say I will remain silent on the issue.
I think I'm going to write a piece. Tu BiShvat, the feast of fruits and nuts. That's great. So let's see if you can get back and control yourself. I'm so sorry, Michael.
Okay,
is this a joy? Is it a joyful festival?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a great festival. I mean, listen. Okay, now we'll get down to who the fruits and nuts are.
Okay.
Dates, figs, pomegranates, dried apricots, raisins, almonds, all kinds of stuff like that. So they have these meals with all these. Oh, there we go. Well,
I was prepared.
Here. You were prepared.
It's so hard because I have so much. Oh, there you go. Okay. So I couldn't get everything, but I got the raisins. I've got the figs, the dates, the almonds, and the apricots. I haven't had dried apricots. We bought these special.
You know what? You know what's fantastic this year here? The pomegranates are amazing. The pomegranates are amazing. In fact, you know what happened today? I cut open the pomegranate and I was digging out the seeds, and the juice splashed on the wall. Well, of course, what it did was it stained the wall. Wasn't supposed to. I had to repaint the wall today because I made such a mess of it with the pomegranate juice. But the pomegranates are.
one of the things when you go to Israel, there's so many things that is, it's different. There's a lot of things that are familiar. People get surprised about the things they are used to that they see there. Like for Canadians, the Shoppers Drug Mart in Jerusalem by the Old City. But let's not get distracted. But one of the things that I just found so unusual were the pomegranate stands, and where they're outdoors and they sell in these plastic cups already. I don't know what you peeled, I guess you call it, or I don't know what you call the seeds when they're out of the pomegranate, which is one of the reasons why people don't buy pomegranates, because it's such a pain to open the thing up. And I've learned it could end up staining your walls. So you got to be really careful. But so
and your clothes.
Oh my! Oh, but they're so wonderful, and seeing so many of them so much. And yeah, go on.
Anyway, for most Jews, Tu BiShvat is kind of like an Arbor Day. Yep. So many Israelis go out into nature at this time, and they celebrate virtually by planting trees. It's a time for the Israelis to go out and plant trees. And this was actually interesting. It's a custom that was adopted at the beginning of the 20th century, early in the 20th century, where the early settlers took up this practice with a view to reclaiming and reforesting the land, which at that time was either desert or malarial swamps, where we used to live, which would be overlooking the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. It was all swampland down there, and it was reclaimed for farming. So there's forestation all over the land. They've been doing it for years, but it's an annual event to go out and plant trees for those who are into that kind of thing. So it's a celebration time for environmentalists, you might say, a great time of year.
I was thinking about this, and as you know, and we tell people that most Jewish people probably don't even know it's Tu BiShvat today. So in Israel, it's become more of a thing in the way that you were explaining, and many people treat it similar to Earth Day. So it becomes an environmental day. But it is interesting how trees in Israel have taken on not just a symbolic, but a very practical major element in the country. That's why, forest fires in Israel are not like having forest fires in Canada. It's so devastating, and it's so important for the land, right? And so, frankly, I've never thought about Tu BiShvat until I realized that I was going to be talking to you today, and thought, oh, well, why don't we talk about it a little bit? And so it's, as maybe you mentioned, it's not in the Bible.
No.
But it became something. And by the way, this thing about the 4 years, so the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and the Passover is supposed to be the beginning of the religious year, and people think it's a little humorous, but we also have different years. We've got fiscal years and school years and religious years in other countries too. But anyway, I was thinking.
But to tell you something, the name for it in Hebrew, another name for Tu BiShvat is Rosh Hashanah L'Ilanot, the New Year of the trees. Literally, right. That's the Hebrew name for it.
Because that was the date. I'm sorry if I missed it. That's the date where you calculated tithing for trees, for fruit, right? Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, so Tu BiShvat's not in the Bible, but trying to get around my microphone here, I think it would be very fitting to read Psalm 1. That says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law, the Torah of the Lord, and on his Torah he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away." And this is why we're doing Thinking Biblically, because of the need to see life through the perspective of God's Word, and how it illumines all of life. Yeah. And so we want to get into your community development work. But speaking of newness and life and all the rest. I do want to do something a little personal, and I do have that person's permission. So I want to bring up something else on screen right now, and that is our brand new granddaughter, Miriam Milana, born to our son Daniel and Alexandra just on Saturday, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Many viewers of Thinking Biblically, a lot of you go back to the Old Testament course that I did, and so you're very familiar with Daniel's also been on Thinking Biblically a few times, and some of you might know that Daniel and Alexandra had 2 miscarriages early in COVID, and so Miriam's arrival is a many-faceted miracle for them, and so far everyone's doing well. So,
Praise God. Congratulations, brother.
Thank you.
Another grandchild.
Grandchild number 8. First, of course, first for Daniel. And
praise be to God. You have a lot of kids. You're going to have a lot of grandchildren. May you remember every name.
Right. Okay. So the last time you were with us here, you shared your unusual, twisty-turny spiritual journey.
Right.
And we got to beginning to be involved with Messianic congregations, and you and I started one, and you've started others in different places. And somewhere along the way, you always cared about Israel, as many Jewish people do, and many other people do. But then something happened, and I don't even know if I know some of the details of what. I don't even want to use the word change, or maybe you could describe it better. Like what happened that made the land of Israel become more front and center in your life?
Well, I think the first thing was that after we graduated university, we spent almost a year on the road. And at that time, we spent 3 months in Israel. We were young at the time. And when we went to Israel, we were overwhelmed just by being there. Had really no desire to go before, but we went there in the winter because the weather was better than anywhere else. And so we ended up working on 2 different kibbutzim there. And Florin and I said, perhaps one day we'd like to raise our family here. But of course, that didn't happen. We tried at the beginning of the 80s to make a trip and again to see if we could settle, but that didn't happen. But it wasn't that I had such a great vision for going to Israel. But around the end of the 90s, I met a couple of non-Jewish people who were very, very gung-ho for Aliyah, which I found most extraordinary.
You're going to have to explain you're going to have to explain Aliyah for the people who don't know what that is.
Yeah, what Aliyah is, the word Aliyah means to go up. It's the picture of pilgrims going up to Jerusalem to celebrate the festivals. And when you go to the land, when you return to the homeland, Eretz Yisrael, you're going up. So consequently, it's called Aliyah. So I had no vision for this really. And in the late 90s, when I had the congregation in Montreal, I encountered a couple of people, one of whom you know, which was Dean Bai, of course. And they began to talk to me about this whole issue of the Jews returning to Israel. And do you have any interest in this? And of course, at that point in time, I had none. I was quite content to be in Canada. And our family by that time had been in Canada for 100 years or so. My grandparents had come from Eastern Europe and so on. And so I was asked, are you interested in this? And I said, no, not really. And then one day this lady came to me. She was a lady from Colorado, and her ministry was called Preparing the Way, and it had to do again with the Jews returning to the land. And we went through the scriptural basis for it, because even in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 30, and through the Bible, through the prophets, major prophets and what are called the minor prophets, who from my point of view are not so minor. Nevertheless, it's made very clear that the day would come when God would gather people back from the lands of the dispersion and bring us all back to the land he promised to our forefathers. So as I began to meditate on these things, one day I had what I'll call an epiphany or a revelatory experience. I was reading Ezekiel chapter 20 because, you see, I did not see in the scripture, other than the fact that God had intention to bring us back, I did not see how he might do it. And in reading Ezekiel 20, I found out that not only did he intend to do it, but we would have a choice. We could go the easy way or we could go the hard way. That literally, because of persecution in the nations, we would be driven out of the countries where our families had resided safely for many years.
So just be clear on that, the easy way and the hard way. So the easy way would be to go before we have to
Yeah.
or are driven to. And you're also more than simply implying that a day will come when, that you believe a day will
Yes.
come when we're going to, Jewish people in the Western world are going to be in trouble. And okay.
Let me put it this way. After I saw this, I mean, beyond, let's say, the scriptural mandate, I had to do some historical background to this. And as I did, one of the scriptures that really came out to me was Deuteronomy 28, the end of Deuteronomy 28, where it speaks about how we would be dispersed in the nations and we would not find rest for the sole of our feet anywhere. And our lives would be, unfortunately, we would live lives of anxiety. And as I began to look at the history of our people, I could see it. I remember one time I counted the expulsions in Europe this is just in Western Europe, between 1394 and 1613, I think it was. And I counted 34 expulsions from different places. And I'm well versed in the history of our people. And I saw at the time that, what was happening in France, where all of a sudden there was this huge upsurge of anti-Semitism in France. And I saw it in Argentina. There were things happening in Argentina. There were things happening in France. And in every case, the response of that community was either to hunker down or just pack up and leave and go. And as we look at the early settlements, for example, same thing. The pogroms drove many out of Eastern Europe in their day. We take a look, later on, we look after the Holocaust, many went. We look even further back into history. We see the expulsions in 1492 from Spain and 1497 from Portugal. And we see God using this rod of persecution to drive people back. And so as I was looking at contemporary history, I began to see the same phenomena. And as I look around the world today, I see the same phenomena. So I'm watching groups that are coming into Israel. For example, the French practically own Netanya, you might say, which is a large city in Israel, and Ashdod. Many of them have bought properties there. They're not the only group. And of course, we saw the Russian migration at the beginning of the 90s. Almost 1 million came from the former Soviet Union, and so on and so on and so forth. And the Jews in the former Soviet Union suffered a lot of hardship under the communist regime. So consequently, this scenario that I saw in action that was prophesied not only by Ezekiel, but actually God used it over and over again through history, I saw it in action. So I said to myself, well, I can go during the time, a window of opportunity, when I can take resources with me. And so one day I was up in Renfrew, where I had a house for, 18 years or so. And there was a tent meeting next door. And a man by the name of Don Finto, who was a pastor from Tennessee, was speaking there. And also to the woman who owned the campground there, her son-in-law who's a minister here in Israel, was there. And we got into a talk with them, and they said, look, why don't you just come and take a look around, at least get your citizenship, and you can look around, meet people, talk to people, and see if this is really for you. So long story short, it began with an exploratory voyage in 2003, 2004. And as I prayed into it, I felt this is what the Lord wants for Florin and myself. And we made the move officially in 2007, but it took us a few years to prepare first.
Do you see signs in North America that Jewish people should be aware of in terms of some of the other things you mentioned about the situations in other countries, whether in the past or more recently in places like France? Do you see signs of that here now?
Well, I think you had, something happen just the other day during, all the demonstrations and riots that preceded the inauguration of Joe Biden in the States, when there were riots in cities like Portland and in Minneapolis and places like that for no reason whatsoever. Synagogues were attacked and Jewish properties were attacked. We saw that happen.
Okay, I think we need to just stop there, because I don't know if I knew that. So everybody knows about the riots following the death of George Floyd. Everybody knows about the what happened January the 6th, right? On Capitol Hill. But you're saying that are you saying that people use that as an excuse to attack synagogues and Jewish people?
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, what you had in those mobs, especially in the riots of the US city, was a real mixed bag of people. In other words, you didn't only have people who were protesting George Floyd, but you had all kinds of different groups coming together. And in the chaos, they took the opportunity to work out their stuff on groups that they felt deserved, a dose of something. So yes, that's definitely what happened during those riots at that time. And again, I remember, the shooting in Pittsburgh and what happened at the synagogue in Poway. So there's things happening now that didn't happen before. Like when I grew up, I don't remember anything of this nature happening. I remember anti-Semitism when I grew up. I certainly was at the butt end of it from time to time, but never anything like this, where houses of worship were being attacked and worshipers were being killed. So yes, it's a cause for concern.
A lot of people don't know the level of security that's common in synagogues and Jewish community centers today, with security people there and locked doors, and so the concern and worry among the Jewish community has increased over the past several years.
Definitely. So that's why I'm saying I'm not putting a timeline on this thing, but what I'm saying is everything that a prophet spoke 2,500 years ago in general terms is actually happening. It's happened over a period, of course, it's happened since that time, you might say, in varying degrees and varying places. But nevertheless, we see these things happening and we see them unfolding in our day. We see a migration, for example, even the last of the Ethiopians that are coming in. Again, they were under tremendous persecution in Ethiopia, the communities in Gondar. So I'm more aware of these things because I'm living here, and I can't help but be up to date on these things. I don't seek them out, but in our media, when things happen to Jews, you find out about it very quickly.
Would you go as so far to say that every Jewish person living outside the land of Israel should make Aliyah?
What else?
I won't take it too personally. Just say what you think.
No. Oh, okay. What the Word of God says in Ezekiel 39 is that God will bring us all back and leave none of us behind. I don't know what the logistics of this are, nor do I know what the timing of this is. But what I do know is that the signs are around us, and we need to respond to them one way or another. I came at the time when I felt the Lord was saying to me, go and do this. It took me 3 years to prepare. And, I had to give up my congregation. I had to take care of my parents who were elderly. I had to, find a way to finance my life in Israel. And at the same time, I was building a house for my office and my congregation. So I had a few balls in the air, you might say, when I did it. But I had the luxury of having time. But there were other groups that came out basically like the Russians, who came out after the fall of the former Soviet Union, basically with whatever bags they could carry and clothes on their back, sort of thing. Or the people who came, from Europe after the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. What we know is this is what's going to happen at some point. I would say that it's more a matter for prayer than anything else. I don't think anybody should rush into something like this in a precipitous fashion. In my case, it required planning. But, I didn't have any children in the house. My kids were married and they were settled, and it was a lot easier for me to manage the move than it is for somebody, say, with a young family or other commitments. So what I'm saying to you is that it's a matter for prayer. At some point in the future, according to Scripture, this will happen. The Lord will bring us back one way or another. So I'm not saying that at this point in time, every Jew should pack up and leave. I think, frankly, that would cause chaos in a lot of places, given the influence of Jewish people in so many places. But I do feel that we need to heed what the Scripture says, and individuals, ask God, what are you saying to me about this at this time? And that's as much as I can say.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And so you eventually make the move, and so why don't we segue into? You mentioned before we started that you've been involved in several. I want to say it right. Quote, community development projects in Israel.
Yeah.
So could you share a little bit of what that is, and why did you do this?
Yeah. The first thing that I became involved in, I guess a couple of years after I was here, was something called the Elim Fund. The word Elim means immigrants. So basically, this was a program for recently arrived immigrants to the land. I worked with a very wonderful man by the name of Dr. Bob Fisher. I love this man dearly. And he founded the fund after there was this mass migration of immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Close to 1 million people came. And again, as I said, many of these people came with no resources whatsoever except the bags they could carry and the clothes on their back. And amongst them were many people who were highly educated, who were forced to take very menial and low-paying jobs because of the linguistic challenges. And also elderly people would come. And in some cases, they were ill, they were not well, and they required assistance. And among this group of people that came, there were many believers. And the problem, of course, with the believers was that if the immigration authorities became aware of the fact that they were believers, there might be some degree of discrimination in terms of, them being able to receive the benefits of Aliyah. So consequently, we formed this fund. The fund was formed to fill that gap and help the believing people in the country, many of whom were living in poverty, with things like rental assistance if they needed it, or home appliance purchases or repairs, payments of utility bills, dental care, medical care, purchase of medications, children's clothing, school supplies, and tuition. And so we had a Russian-speaking pastor as our worker who canvassed the congregations and presented us with the needs. And as a committee, we would consider all the applications for assistance that were submitted monthly and fund the requests that appeared to be legitimate. We had to vet the requests. There were some which weren't necessarily on the level. I won't say any more than that. And so essentially, in this particular case, this was assistance to a disadvantaged community, whatever the need was. And so that was the first project I was involved in. The second project I became involved in was a computer literacy project, which I think would certainly be something you would have been interested in. One of the things that I became aware of when we first arrived in Israel was the plight of the recently arrived Ethiopian immigrants. They began to come in a small number back to the land in the 80s as well as the 90s. And unfortunately, in the case of the Ethiopians, while Israel is a land of immigrants, there was discrimination against minority groups like the Ethiopians based on, unfortunately, skin color. The majority of Jews, at least at that time, are fair-skinned, many of European origin, though there were many Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and stuff. But the Ethiopians in particular were virtually uneducated and had been subsistence farmers in their native land, and they were totally unaccustomed to life in the 20th century. In a 20th century industrialized and technically advanced society that Israel had become. And so because of their lack of language skills and technical knowledge, they too were also relegated at the outset to the most menial forms of employment, often as day laborers, if they could find work at all. But when the children grew up and went to school, they learned Hebrew. But because of their poverty, they didn't have access to computers and the internet in their homes. And as a result, when it came to finding better types of employment than their parents, even though they could speak Hebrew, they not only faced continued racial discrimination, but their lack of computer knowledge had become a serious handicap in an increasingly computerized society. So the computer literacy program was our answer to this problem. We hired instructors to teach computer skills to young people. And that's what we did. And this project was so successful that the municipality of Haifa decided the following year to take it over and to fund it from that time forward. So obviously they were extremely impressed with the project, and it assisted many, giving them a kind of leg up, you might say, when it came to employment. Because I spoke to one brother who is now the pastor of one of the larger congregations in Haifa, who has a social work background, and he filled me in on the challenges of that community. So he loved the project and helped us in whatever ways he could to establish it. Another project we had, which was a very unusual project.
So sorry, Michael, let me interrupt you for a second. I try to be a little faster on the interruptions, but computer literate me doesn't always press the right buttons. Anyway, you've spent much of your life in what we call ministry,
yes,
leading congregations and teaching God's word and caring for what people would term that as caring for people's souls. And here you are, you answer a call of the God of Israel to return to the land of our fathers, and you end up organizing computer courses for immigrants. How?
Well, I'll explain this to you. One of the things that I saw was what is the, if you look at the Bible makes it abundantly clear that when he brings us back to the land, he'll prosper us in the land. Okay? Israel is an extraordinary place, but there's great inequities. There are communities that are impoverished. There are people that are suffering. I've even seen amongst North Americans who've come that for whatever reason they came and they went simply because they couldn't make it. So consequently, in a sense, we're assisting the Lord with these people in the sense that they can become gainfully employed, that they can support, they can raise families, they can support families, they can be, knitted to the fabric of Israeli society and become believing people. So consequently, for me, the projects of this nature have everything to do with, the Bible, have everything to do with human need. God, when he brought us into the land, he brought us into a land where there were vines and tilled fields and everything. There was sustenance. And so therefore, this is very much in the heart of God that when his people return, they should be able to find sustenance there as well. So that's where it comes from. I have a heart for the poor. I've lived through hard times and I know what it's like not to have. I really do. And my heart goes out to people, especially when they're disadvantaged, especially when I'll never forget the first time I saw the immigrant, the Ethiopian Zelen. I happened to be in Nahariya. This goes way back. And right across the street from the hotel where I was staying, there was an absorption center. I walk out of the hotel, I look across the street, and there's all these people, and they're wearing like robes, like they look like African robes, and they're kind of squatting down on the sidewalk. And I looked at them and I said, "These are Jews?" I couldn't believe it. I said, "These are a tribal people. What am I looking at? Jews? How can, what Jews look like for you and me, right?" I'd never seen anything like this before. And so I became sensitized at the time to these people. And I realized what a disconnect there would be when they came into a land like Israel. What a disconnect culturally in every way. And so therefore they needed the leg up. So it was from that kind of heart that, I engaged in this kind of thing.
Yeah, I really appreciate you explaining all that. It's a tragedy the way we separate things spiritual from things material. When the Bible doesn't do that, we could.
No.
There have been times where, in the name of Jesus, people have downplayed the spiritual in favor of the social and the material. That goes back to this thing called the social gospel. But often, and it's hard for a lot of people to grasp this, the way we overemphasize the spiritual over the material, because and really how bad that is. We see references, right through the scriptures, rooted in the Torah, but then we have statements in the New Testament, seeing somebody in need and not doing anything about it is ungodly. It's wrong. People who don't take care of their own family are worse than unbelievers, Paul writes. And so in caring about people and caring about their material needs are so important. And I'm delighted to hear of things like that have really caught your heart as God has brought you back to the land. It's one of the things we didn't touch on before. There are people that would love to help, would love to find ways to support works like you've been talking about and other things. But as you know, people get inundated by all sorts of organizations, and I don't know which ones to trust. I don't know if you're prepared on the spot right now. Do you know of if people want to help with things like this, where they could send money?
I think what I would do, Alan, is I would think about it, because I need to consider that the places where the funds will go, they'll be used for the purposes that they should be used for. And I'll let you know. In other words, I'll email you, I'll give you a list of these things. You can publish them at a later time. I wanted to tell you about one more interesting project quickly. I know time is running. We had a tennis project. We had a brother who was a tennis instructor who worked with Arab communities, and he was teaching tennis skills to Ethiopian youngsters. And you might say, well, why would we teach tennis to disadvantaged children who'd never seen a tennis racket or participated in organized sports? But as you know, the benefit of sports to kids at any age group is obvious. It builds discipline if they practice regularly. It increases hand-eye coordination, increases motor skills, teaches sportsmanship, builds confidence in kids as their familiarity with the sport and their confidence in it grows. And it teaches them basically that they can master things that they never tried before. And these skills are all transferable to other areas of life. And so the first project was a really interesting one. It was in Jerusalem. We did two of them. The first was in Jerusalem at a community center in the Ethiopian neighborhood. And what passed for a tennis court was just, the court was in abominable condition. It had deep potholes and broken glass. It was a mess. It was just a mess. And so a massive cleanup was done there, and this new activity was advertised around the neighborhood. And the moms began to bring their children, who immediately, like, they thought, man, they really wanted to do this. They wanted to learn this new sport. And so a very funny thing happened. So the kids came, and other kids came from the neighborhood too, who weren't able to participate, and they were jealous. And so they began to interfere. They'd run on the court. They'd do this. They just basically try to mess things up, right? And what happened was, we were told, well, maybe we shouldn't do this here. But the next week, all the mothers came, and fathers, some of them who weren't working, and they stood there to protect their children so the kids could learn the sport. And as a result of this, the following year, the municipality installed a brand new state-of-the-art tennis courts, plural, at the community, state-of-the-art tennis courts at the community center. And so the project continued. Again, the municipality took it over because it was great. Same thing happened in Haifa. I think one of the funniest things I ever saw was we were doing it in Haifa, and we were started with kids from 5 to 8 years old. Imagine teaching them tennis. And again, the same thing happened. All the kids on the outside, they were, we want to play. And so again, the municipality took it over, and the project continues, and they teach tennis to the kids, and they're reaping the benefit of learning a sport and the confidence it instills in them. So again, it's a community development project. It's not just, it's interesting because not far from the courts in Haifa, there's another court that's used by professionals. And the idea was that if the kids show promise, we would send them over and perhaps fund them, at a higher level of instruction. So this was one of the fun things to do. That one in Haifa was, it was fun. It really was. There are other things I've done, but we'll leave it there because time flies.
Well,
beyond.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. It's a wonderful story, and it demonstrates the creativity that God gives His people. It also hopefully encourages people. I think a lot of people have gifts given to them by God that have been untapped because they think serving God means it has to look a certain way. So
that's right.
If it's ministry is seen as like the big one, but then doctors and nurses, sure, but in things like using sports, and it's not, some people, oh, we'll do sports so we can use it as a springboard to talk about the Lord to people, but it's more like that. And you listed them, the benefits, and our father Abraham was called that God would develop a people through him that
That's
by his grace we're physical members of, to be blessings to the nations. And the
that's right.
whole understanding of blessing and barach is, bringing life where there's
Yeah,
death, and hope where there's despair, and healing where there's sickness, and peace in communities that are
yeah,
broken. And it's
yeah,
such a delight to hear of these various things that you've done, for the creative insights you've been given, and the courage to pursue some of these things, and then to see the Lord's hand
yeah,
on these things. And so I want to encourage people that are listening. This is not just about what God's doing in Israel. Wherever you are, what is God calling you to make a
yeah,
difference? And let nobody judge you because you want to pursue something like tennis, or even better, baseball. But we won't get into that. And then I would love to get somebody on who could talk about baseball in Israel sometime. We did that a little bit with David Friedman when
yeah.
he was here before he passed away, and he was a pioneer of baseball in Israel. And so sports can be a great, great blessing. So, Michael, that is great. Now, you mentioned you'll let me know about maybe some organizations that people could support. But the last time you were with us, you allowed us to mention your email address. Is that still okay? Can people get in touch with you directly if they
Yes,
have
it's
any
fine.
questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
No problem at all.
and the
I'm
same
more
one
than
as
happy.
the same one as
One.
before, the Hotmail one.
Yeah, the Hotmail one.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's ljudh at hotmail.com .ca,
Yeah.
and
That's
I'll
it.
make sure to put that in the description. And so
Okay.
really, really appreciate your time. Chag Sameach. That's happy festival. Remember, it's Tu BiShvat. And may
Hug,
God.
hug, hug Tu BiShvat Sameach.
Oh,
You put
thank
the Tu
thank you.
BiShvat in the middle.
Okay, thank you.
Shvat Sameach.
Thank you for that. And I
You're
receive,
welcome.
and I receive it. And may all that you do be blessed by the Lord, and may your leaves prosper in season as He continues to root you deeper and deeper in
Thank
Himself.
you.
And
Thank you
so
very much, brother.
so thanks to Michael Gertsman for doing that with us today. And again, his email address is in the description below. But in case you're simply listening, it's ljudh at hotmail.ca. And if you have any questions for myself, or maybe you have some guest recommendations or other comments, you can send that to comments at thinkingbiblically.org. Comments at thinkingbiblically.org. And so until next time, this is Alan Gilman for Thinking Biblically.